Okay, let's talk about Dragon Age the Veilguard. Don, don, don. How woke is it? I've got some reactions to that, but at this point, mostly, I don't know, I guess questions for some of the folks that are making a big deal out of the sort of woke elements. I'll get to that in a little bit. But let's start with gameplay. So, I think this is an action game with an RPG presentation. That's kind of like what I feel. Now, I need to be clear. This is my first impressions of the game after 5 hours. I'm going to be updating my thoughts as I play the game on the Christian Geek Central podcast. You can look at the show notes of the Geek Week segment for when I have more to say about things as I get deeper into it. So I do still have some questions, but I'll just say at the front, if I'm turned off by elements of the game, it's not political messaging at this point. It has to do with aesthetic presentation, tone, and gameplay. So let's get into that, just what I really feel like I'm seeing pretty clearly in the first 5 hours. So yeah, action game with RPG presentation rather than being an RPG or even an action RPG. I'm playing as a wizard or mage class, and basically for most of the first 5 hours, have had one to two spells that usually blow my mana supply when I use them, at least for most, if not that entire encounter of enemies. You can switch between two weapon loadouts, which for me as a wizard is kind of like long range and shorter range. And you also have mechanics like stagger and finishing moves. And so it all adds up to make it feel like a straight action game rather than an action RPG. I mean, like, rather than having numerous spells as options, I have, an extra weapon loadout. And I'm like, that doesn't feel really like a wizard class. Or like finishing moves. And I mean, all classes get I think the weapon loadout change. They get the finishing move. So as far as like my experience playing a wizard, I guess I get some feeling, a little bit of spell variety switching between the orb and dagger and my staff. Like, one way of magic-y attack and another way of magic-y attack. And then I also have a spell that I can, blow now and then, but then I'm, basically done except for my normal magic casting, just using my magic weapons, basically, for most of the fight. And there's like a wide attack that can get several enemies in short range, or a single enemy attack that's more long range. And so there's some variety in types of attacks, but the spell variety itself, I just wouldn't use the word variety to describe it. Let's see here. Yeah, so all of those things added up, it just makes it feel, to me at least, like a straight action game rather than action RPG. Now, you can pause and give orders to teammates, but that's really mostly, if not exclusively, to do special moves. But I mean, I didn't feel incentivized to really explore the options of my other teammates and what I could command them to do on the normal difficulty. And honestly, I kept forgetting it was even an option. They do a fine enough job, and I don't feel like combat was that difficult on normal for most of my first 5 hours. I think it did start to ramp up a bit toward the end. But instead of exploring those options more, I just decided to dial down the difficulty because I just wasn't that interested in the combat or the other elements of the game. I'll get to that. So also, I haven't run into any mana potions yet, which I'm like, come on. This... if it's an action RPG and there's a mana system, give me some mana potions. That's not a requirement in RPGs. There are some RPGs that don't have mana potions, but it is a striking absence as far as I'm concerned. A striking absence. Sorry. A max of 3 healing potions so far. That feels weird, but not unexpected. That's the kind of thing that some action RPGs have done, that this series, I think, has done in at least 1 or 2 games. I prefer to have just the ability to just fill my pack with 90 of these suckers and just keep spamming them, But oh well. There are frequent vases that, you bust open and they give you another healing potion. But this almost feels like refilling a cooldown rather than resupplying, because again, I can't carry more than 3 max. Most, if not all, bodies of enemies after defeating them have no loot. I can't remember getting loot from any body yet. So I'm not sure that that's a thing at all. Instead, they are pretty exclusively found in chests, pouches, environmental objects, as you are making your way through levels. The level design is fairly linear, but you do have some places you can go off to the left or right. And so, in that sense, at least the layout incentivizes exploration, because in the sense that you can go off the path and you're likely to find something. But what you find does not incentivize me. Loot is very often coin or items that translate to coin, and maybe like some faction points, which faction points kind of unlock things that you can eventually, once you get a certain number of faction points, that you reach a tier that allows you to spend, I don't know, money or other things to upgrade your items. So the faction point system just doesn't feel very gratifying to gain faction points. At least not in the moment when you're like finding the loot. And that's where I really want loot to feel satisfying, is when I pick it up, I immediately in that moment sense or have an idea of how this is going to make me stronger. If it doesn't make me stronger right then, that's my preference. Pick it up and like, oh, this is a new piece of armor. Is this better than what I have? Yes, no, okay. But that's really not a regular thing compared to other RPGs. I think I've run into it more in maybe the odd chest now and then, or something, a chest after a big boss fight, or it's a quest reward. So I guess just, you get to a certain point and a bow just materializes out of thin air for one of your companions, or rather materializes in a menu, alerting you to the fact that you now have this item. So the loot leaves a lot to be desired for me. The action combat has some cool feeling moments every once in a while, but mechanically, I don't feel like I'm playing a mage. So immersion in playing that class, playing as a mage, is really based on visuals alone for me, which is not a good thing. There are lots of fine-tuning options for difficulty, so I really appreciate this. I think this is great. I wish so many more games would do this. And I've resolved to dial it down to the easiest at this point. I did that probably in the last 30 to 45 minutes of my playing of the first 5 hours. Dialing it down to easiest, my plan is just to kind of plow through areas without much exploring, and keep there's actually a don't die option checked. Only when you're in a custom difficulty or on the lowest difficulty mode can you check this main character doesn't die. So that prevents basically fail states, from what I understand, because your companions, they either don't die or them dying won't trigger like a fail state. Just the main character, your main character. So I suspect that playing dialed way down to easy with the don't die option on is going to allow me to blaze through the main story, skipping side quests, because man, already the main quest does not feel urgent at all. I'll get to that, so I can't imagine the side quests and how trivial they must feel. So I'm going to skip side quests, I think, and skip any XP grinding, if that's even an option, can't tell yet, in favor of getting through the story and gameplay in the amount of time that both are likely to still be fine to me and not boring. I think if I were to slow things down, keep the difficulty up, do some side quests, stuff like that, I would just run into much more quickly and much more often those elements that make me disinterested in this game. And so I'd rather just kind of like blow through the story, see some flashy combat, but, get through it pretty quickly, because even the flashy combat is going to stop looking flashy and just look boring and same after a while. So before it loses its luster is my strategy right now, to just blaze through this thing. So what does that luster look like in terms of sound and visuals? Well, the sound I don't have much to say about. I think it's fine. It's solid. The visuals, the execution I think is good, but the faces and character animations and the voice acting have a much lighter, almost Disney animated vibe at times. There's definitely some grotesque designs in creatures, in environments. There's these pulsating kind of sacks that you have to blow up now and then to clear the areas, or to move on to the next part of the area. But it's still all presented in a slightly lighter way. Like the dark spawn will have these really glowing, brightly glowing red eyes in a way that doesn't look sinister. It just looks kind of video gamey and cartoony, I guess. I also can't have a truly old-looking, white-haired wizard. And his beard even looks dark-haired in shadows. Just the moment I step into a shadow, it looks like it's black, very dark gray or like a black type, starting to gray type of hair color. And I want to play an old, decrepit, whenever possible, wizard. Very few role-playing games let me do that, the decrepit part, but I'd at least like to look old, and I can't get very far into that in the character designs here. Though I do appreciate that female models of your companions are not sexualized as they are by just default in so many games that we just kind of take it for granted. And there's a wider variety of features that are drawn from, and I'm not just talking about like race and ethnicity. I'm not really into demographic box checking just for the sake of it. So I mean, that's not what I'm talking about. But the fact that some people have more prominent noses with a more prominent bone and kind of bony kind of look to the bridge, or wider and less flattering hips among some women, or there's one character with just tons of freckles. And I'm trying to think of like the last games that had characters with these kinds of just more normal person type features. I do not want to find myself getting on board with complaining about quote-unquote ugly female characters, as has been showing up now and then in just kind of like gaming culture among a few. These feature choices that have been added and that are being used here, which do not consistently appeal to the features I'm particularly attracted to in women, that's good for me, and it's good for gamers. I would love to see this trend in comics, TV, and movies too. Yes, the heroes, we want them to be idealized, and it makes sense in terms of what they're doing physically, that they would be physically fit and stuff. But when like everybody, I'm looking at you, CW, when everybody looks like they just came off of a runway somewhere, that's immersion breaking too. All right, so let's talk about the story. Well, my biggest problem with the writing at this point is that nothing seems very dire or urgent. And that's mostly due to, it's not just writing, it's the voice and animation performances. So the way the voice actors are performing their characters, and it's consistent enough, some certainly more than others, but it's consistent enough that I think it's a directorial choice. So between the voice acting tone and the animation style of how characters express themselves as they're gesturing with their hands and with their facial expressions as they're talking, and then the dialogue, which is very marvelly, which just kind of trivializes everything horrible that's going on. Just like, like one character says something like, boy, yeah, my gods are running all over the world and just destroying everything, and well, I guess it's just one of those days. And I'm like, what the crap is happening here? So yeah, and there's an early, so marvelly dialogue, very much like most recent MCU movies and shows in that regard. There's an early main story mission that even involves you unpacking and reminiscing. And I'm like, maybe deeper in the game, when there's characters that I really care about and we've just been through the crap for a long while, give me a kind of restful moment where I'm reflecting back on these characters. But I'm like, this is an unpacking scene this early on. We got stuff to do. We got a world to save, don't we? Anyway, so I'm just not feeling pulled to find out what happens next, because it seems like, everything is not so bad, which is the same complaint I've had of Marvel movies for a good while now. The role-play opportunities I find are more restrictive than ever. You can't be a jerk. This has been pointed out by many commentators on this game so far. And even if a dialogue option implies that you will be a jerk in what you're about to say, how you're about to say it, what actually comes out of your mouth, it comes out pretty soft and tame no matter what. More so than both Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition, I feel restricted in my ability to roleplay as a character of my own design, my own personality ideas. Plenty of times also your character's just talking at length without you getting any choice at all. So in both mechanics and writing, this just feels like an RPG in name only. As far as the themes, I suppose that's what a number of people will be curious about my thoughts on. I'm just in the first 5 hours. No left-leaning elements are being clearly presented at this point. Of course, so much can change deeper in. I have seen the infamous barving scene presented on YouTube by some commentators, where a companion punishes themselves with push-ups for forgetting to use another companion's preferred pronoun. If that's a main story quest, I'll say more when I run into it. That'll be on the Christian Geek Central podcast in the Geek Week segment. But if it's part of an optional companion quest, especially if it's part of a romance companion story scene of some kind, I probably won't ever see it because my character doesn't care about anyone else, romantically or otherwise. And on that front, or related to that a bit, I think it's worth being a little wary of content creators making a big deal out of that scene, or anytime you notice content creators all making a big deal out of the same clip in a game and kind of characterizing the whole game based on them making a big deal out of this, one scene or these two scenes or whatever. Now, maybe the folks that are making a big deal out of this, making videos where this is the main topic, maybe they're not overblowing things. But keep in mind that they are incentivized to make content, to make video titles, to make thumbnails that lean hard against LGBTQ+ / quote-unquote woke content. They are incentivized to, as it were, go looking for trouble. And if you look at the kinds of videos they put out, you can quickly figure out, I think, where they're getting their bread and butter from. And that knowledge should be used to weigh the likelihood of their objectivity. It's also important, I think, to avoid adopting the wrong and harmful attitudes of those who make engaging content and share some common stances with us. It's easy to get caught up in the sinful us versus them attitudes that characterize many of the videos that are critical of socially liberal elements in games. As Christians, we are called to speak the truth in love. So before we get caught up in the flow of a YouTuber who has some stances maybe that we would agree with, ask yourself, is this person also conveying that they love the people they disagree with, that they have compassion for those they disagree with? And I'd want you guys to hold me to that as well. So, in summary, my experience of the game so far is, it's fine. And it's made more so by forcing my meta-level role-playing of Elderast into my recording sessions. But, fine is not really what I want in a game. I strongly suspect that if I don't barrel through the main story, I will lose all interest. And if I were playing this just for me and not making playthrough content with a role-playing emphasis, I doubt I would get around to finishing it. Again, I'm not finding it offensively bad, just not as interesting in story and especially gameplay compared to many other options at my fingertips. Now, again, I have to stress, a lot can change when I get deeper into games, but with so many choices of things I can do with my time, even just in video games alone, but that's not my only hobby and interest. So many choices. So I really place the burden, without any guilt about it, I place the burden on developers to show me how fun their game really is, how interesting their story really can be. In the first 5 hours, show me that potential. I don't need to see all the systems in play, but I need to get a sense of what type of game this is going to be and why I'm going to love it. And if they don't present that to me strongly in the first 5 hours, well, someone else will. And I'll move on to their game, and I will be happy as a clam. Maybe not knowing that I missed something great if I would have played 20 more hours of not having fun to get to it. But, I can just spend those 20 hours playing something else that's fun right away and then move on to something else that's fun right away. There's just so many things. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm going to update my thoughts and reactions in the Christian Geek Central podcast Geek Week segment as I continue through the game. So you can keep an eye on the show notes of each episode for more of what I have to say as I continue my journey through Dragon Age: The Veilguard. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.